The wine glass shattered at exactly 9 o'clock. Later, no one at Ravenscroft Hall would remember who had knocked it over. But everyone would remember what came after, because that broken glass was the beginning of everything. The scullery maid knelt on the dining room floor, gathering the pieces with quick, careful fingers. The Duke of Ravenscroft glanced down at her. It should have been nothing. A servant, a mess, a moment. He had already begun to turn away. Then he saw her hands. Every scullery maid he had ever seen had hands like old leather, red, cracked, swollen from scalding water and lye soap. This girl's hands were slender, smooth. The hands of a lady who had never scrubbed a pot in her life. And there, on the middle finger of her right hand, was a small dark smudge he knew very well. Ink. Scullery maids did not write. Most of them could not. The Duke said nothing. He did not call for the housekeeper. He did not ask her name. He simply watched her sweep up the last of the glass, curtsy without lifting her eyes, and slip out of the room like a shadow. But that night, for the first time in 3 years, the Duke of Ravenscroft could not sleep. He would say nothing for weeks. He would only watch. And that silence would change both their lives forever. 3 weeks earlier, a girl calling herself Emma Carter had arrived at the servants' entrance of Ravenscroft Hall with one small trunk and a letter of reference. The letter said she had worked 2 years in a gentleman's house in York. It was signed by a housekeeper named Mrs. Prout. There was no Mrs. Prout. There was no house in York. Emma had written the letter herself, by candlelight, in a cheap boarding room, practicing an older woman's handwriting until her fingers ached. It was the first dishonest thing she had ever done in her life. She told herself it would not be the last, and that she would beg God's forgiveness for all of it later, after she had done what she came to do. The butler, Mr. Crane, had read the letter twice. He was a tall, dry man of about 60, with pale eyes that never seemed to blink, and he had stared at Emma so long that her heart began to pound. "Carter," he said at last, as if the name tasted strange to him. "You'll start in the scullery, 5 in the morning until the last pot is dry. You'll speak to no one above stairs. If I hear one complain about you, you'll be out that door without a character. Do you understand me, girl?" "Yes, Mr. Crane." Ravenscroft Hall does not forgive mistakes. Neither do I, Emma thought, but she only curtsied and said, "Yes, Mr. Crane." And so her days became fire and water. She rose in the dark, hauled coal, scrubbed copper pots until her arms trembled, and plunged her hands into water hot enough to make her gasp. The other servants were kind enough. Cook slipped her extra bread, and the housemaids taught her which floorboards creaked. But Mr. Crane watched her the way a hawk watches a field, and Emma could not understand why. She was careful, she was quiet, she made no mistakes. Yet twice in her first week, she caught him standing in the scullery doorway, saying nothing, just watching her work with those pale, unblinking eyes. And twice, he gave her the filthiest tasks in the house minutes before she was due to rest, as if he wanted her too exhausted to think. "He can't know," she told herself. "No one knows. No one alive remembers my face." Because Emma Carter did not exist. Her real name was Emma Ashford. And 9 years ago, her father, Thomas Ashford, the most trusted man of business in the county, had managed every account, every ledger, every penny of the old Duke of Ravenscroft's fortune. Emma still remembered riding beside him in the carriage as a little girl, waiting in the sunny courtyard of this very house while her father worked, a peppermint in her pocket from the old cook. Then in one terrible autumn it had all ended, money missing from the estate, pages of figures in her father's hand, a trial that lasted 4 days. Her gentle, honest father, a man who returned an extra shilling if a shopkeeper made a mistake, dragged away to debtor's prison as a thief and a forger, shouting to the last that he was innocent. Their house was sold. Her mother died of shame and fever within 2 years, And Emma had grown up in poverty with one single, burning certainty in her heart. Her father had not done it. She had no proof. Proof was expensive, and lawyers did not listen to poor young women. But her father, in the prison visiting room, had gripped her hands through his tears and said the words she had carried for 9 years like a lamp in the dark. "The truth is in the ledgers, Emmy. The real ledgers, the ones I kept. If they still exist, they are somewhere in Ravenscroft Hall. I wrote what I saw, and someone knew I wrote it." The old Duke was dead now. His son had the title, a man Emma had never met, said to be cold, unmarried, and joyless. The gossip in the village claimed he had not held a single ball since his father's funeral, that he trusted no one, and that the only person who had served the family long enough to remember the old days was the butler, Mr. Crane. So Emma scrubbed pots and kept her eyes down and learned the house. She learned that the old estate papers were kept in the muniment room in the east wing, behind a locked oak door. She learned that there was only one key. And she learned from Cook's idle chatter exactly where that key lived, on the ring that never, day or night, left the belt of Mr. Crane. Then came the night of the dinner party, the night of the broken glass. Emma had been called upstairs to help clear, because a footman had taken ill. She had knelt to gather the shattered crystal, feeling the heat of the candles and the eyes of the fine guests above her, praying only to be invisible. She never noticed the Duke looking at her hands. She never saw his gaze catch on the ink stain, the stain from the letter she wrote to her father every single night, letters that began, "Dearest Papa, be patient, I am closer than ever." She curtsied and escaped to the kitchen, her heart drumming, telling herself she had gotten away with it. She was wrong. The next morning, the Duke of Ravenscroft did something he had not done in 3 years of grief and silence. He came down to breakfast early, rang for the butler, and asked, in a voice so casual it fooled even himself, "Crane, the new girl in the scullery, where did she come from?" "York, your grace, excellent references." A pause, half a heartbeat too long. "Is something wrong with her work?" "No," said the Duke, turning a page of his newspaper. "Nothing at all." But he had heard it, that tiny pause, and Crane had seen something flicker in his master's face. 2 men at that quiet breakfast table had just begun to lie to each other. And in the scullery below, her arms deep in scalding water, Emma Ashford worked on, not knowing that from this morning forward, she was being watched by both of them. Emma's room was in the attic under the slope of the roof, so small that she could touch both walls if she stretched out her arms. It held a narrow bed, a washstand, a 3-legged stool, and her trunk. But it had a door that closed, and after midnight it had a candle. That was all Emma needed. Every night when the great house finally went dark and the last footsteps faded on the back stairs, she would wait counting slowly to 500, the way she had taught herself. Then take out her wooden pen, her small bottle of ink, and a sheet of cheap paper. "Dearest Papa asterisk. Be patient, I am closer than ever. I am inside the house now, yes, inside Ravenscroft Hall itself. Do not be angry with me. I know you forbade it. But you have given 9 years to this injustice, and I will not give it a 10th. She wrote to him every night, though she could only afford to post a letter once a week, on her half-day from the village 2 miles away. She never posted them from the estate. She never signed her name. The letters went to the prison addressed to Mr. T.A. Asterisk, care of the chaplain, a kind old man who had long ago stopped asking questions. Her father's replies came rarely, written in the shaky hand that broke her heart, the hand that had once filled ledgers with figures as neat as printed type. His last letter she kept sewn inside the lining of her trunk, and she knew it by memory. "Emmy, my brave girl, you must be careful above all things. Listen to me now. Whoever did this did not do it alone and did not do it from outside. The figures were changed by someone who could enter the study freely, someone the old Duke never questioned. When I told His Grace my suspicions, he grew pale and told me to speak of it to no one, he said, until he had looked into it himself. 3 days later, the constables came for me. Do you understand what I am telling you, my dear? The old Duke knew something, and someone made certain he never had those 3 days. 9 years, and those words still made the back of Emma's neck go cold. Someone who could enter the study freely. Someone the old Duke never questioned. In 3 weeks at Ravenscroft Hall, Emma had learned that only one servant remained from her father's time. The war had taken some, age had taken others, and the young Duke, strange, people said, for a man so attached to his father's memory, had pensionied off nearly all the rest within a year of the funeral. All but one. Mr. Crane had been butler under the old Duke. Mr. Crane had carried keys to every room, including the study, for 30 years. Mr. Crane's pale eyes followed her down every corridor. It proved nothing. Emma knew that. A suspicious mind was not evidence. That lesson she had learned in the cruelest way possible, watching 12 jurymen convict her father on suspicion dressed up as figures. She needed the ledgers. By day, she gathered facts the way other women gathered sewing scraps. The muniment room was in the east wing, past the old library, third door on the left. She had carried a coal scuttle down that corridor twice, walking slowly, memorizing. The door was black oak with iron bands, and its lock was old, a big, old-fashioned keyhole, the kind her father used to say a clever child could tickle open with a hatpin. Emma had 2 hatpins. They had been her mother's. The trouble was time. A scullery maid's day was owned by the bells from 5 in the morning until 10 at night, and the east wing lay on the far side of the house from the attic stairs. To reach it at night meant crossing the long gallery, where the floor creaked, or the main landing, past the door of the Duke himself. The Duke, Emma had seen him perhaps a dozen times, always at a distance, and she could not make him match the village gossip. Cold, they said, joyless. And it was true he rarely smiled, true the great house held no music and no guests beyond a few silent dinners. But she had also seen him, one gray morning from the scullery window, stop in the middle of the courtyard to let the stable boy's puppy attack his boot, and stand there patiently, an important letter in his hand, until the puppy had won the battle. Joyless men did not do that. It doesn't matter what he is, she told herself sternly, plunging another pot into the scalding water. He is a Ravenscroft. His family's name was saved by ruining ours. Duke or puppy or saint, he would throw you into the road the moment he learned your name. Still, since the night of the broken glass, something in the house had shifted. She could not have said what. The Duke came downstairs earlier now. Twice he had passed through the kitchen corridor, where, cook swore, no Duke had set foot in living memory on some errand about the wine cellar. And once, carrying a basin out to the yard, Emma had looked up at the tall windows of the study and seen him standing there, quite still, looking down. Not at the garden, at her. She was almost sure of it. You're frightening yourself, she thought. To him you are a mop and a pail. Great men do not see servants. She had 400 pounds of belief in that idea, and she was about to learn it was counterfeit. It happened on a Thursday, her half-day. She had walked to the village, posted her weekly letter, and hurried back through a spitting rain. Up the back stairs, into her little attic room, peeling off her wet shawl. Emma stopped. Her trunk sat at the foot of the bed, exactly where it always sat. The lid was closed, the leather strap buckled, everything as she had left it. Except, every morning since her first at Ravenscroft Hall, Emma had done one small thing her father had taught her in the prison visiting room, holding her hand, speaking low. If you insist on this madness, Emmy, then you will do it properly. Trust no lock. A lock only tells a thief where to look. Leave a sign instead, something small, something no one would notice. Every morning she laid a single gray thread from her darning basket across the trunk strap, tucked into the buckle, invisible unless you knew. The thread was gone. Emma stood in her wet dress in the middle of the tiny room, water dripping from her hair, and made herself breathe. Slowly, she knelt and opened the trunk. Nothing was missing. Her spare dress, her Sunday shawl, her mother's Bible, her sewing basket, all there, all folded, all just slightly wrong. The Bible face down when she always laid it face up. The shawl folded in 3 when she always folded it in 4. Someone had searched her trunk. Searched it carefully, patiently, and put everything back. Someone with all the time in the world and no fear of being disturbed. Her eyes went to the lining, to the corner seam where her father's letter lay hidden, and her heart nearly stopped. She ran her fingers along the stitching. Intact, her own small stitches unbroken, the letter was safe. This time, Emma sat back on her heels, cold all over, and the thought came to her clear and quiet. Someone in this house does not believe in Emma Carter. She had planned to wait another week, to learn the night sounds of the house better, to be patient the way her father begged her to be patient. There was no more time for patient. Tomorrow night, when the clock struck 1, she was going to the East Wing. The Duke of Ravenscroft had learned patience in the hardest school there is, grief. 3 years ago he had buried his father and inherited a title, a fortune, and a silence that filled 40 rooms. People thought him cold. The truth was simpler. He had stopped trusting his own judgment. His father, the wisest man he knew, had died bewildered and broken, muttering about accounts and betrayal, gripping his son's wrist in the last hour with words that made no sense. The ledgers, Edward, I was wrong. God forgive me, I think I was wrong about him. Wrong about whom? The old Duke never said. By morning he was gone, and Edward had been left with a question buried in a grave. So no, the Duke did not confront the scullery maid with the ink-stained fingers. A younger Edward might have. This Edward set out to learn her, quietly, the way one learns a chess opponent. He began with small things. On Tuesday, he left a book on the hall table where she polished the floor each morning, a volume of Latin verse, laid casually open. Then he stood in the shadow of the library door and watched. Emma scrubbed her way toward the table, glanced at the pages once and looked away. Nothing. But a moment later her eyes went back and moved, left to right, line after line, down the whole page. Her lips shaped a word. She caught herself, flushed, and scrubbed on twice as fast. Scullery maids did not read Latin. On Thursday, he tried something crueler and was slightly ashamed of himself. Passing through the kitchen corridor on his invented errand about the wine cellar, he paused near the scullery door and said to his valet, in rapid French, "They say the girl is from York, but I would wager £50 she has never seen it." Through the doorway, he saw her shoulders stiffen over the sink, just for a heartbeat. Then she plunged another pot into the water as if she had heard nothing at all. Scullery maids did not understand French. That evening the Duke sat long over his untouched brandy, turning the puzzle in his hands. A gentlewoman then, educated, well-born, hiding in his scullery under a false name and a forged letter, ruining her lovely hands in lye water. Why? A thief would have gone for the silver weeks ago. Crane counted it obsessively and nothing was missing. A runaway wife, a debtor, a spy sent by one of his cousins to sniff about the will. Or something to do with the ledgers his dying father could not stop speaking of. That thought had arrived on the first night and refused to leave. What the Duke did not know was that his quiet game had a second player, and that the second player was not Emma. Mr. Crane had served Ravenscroft Hall for over 30 years, and he had survived that long by noticing things. He noticed that his Grace now came downstairs before 8. He noticed the Latin book that appeared on the hall table for no reason and vanished the same afternoon. He noticed his master inventing errands that took him past the kitchens, and he noticed whom those errands passed. And Crane, who had searched a certain trunk in a certain attic room and found nothing but a Bible and mended stockings, began to feel, for the first time in 9 years, the cold touch of fear. So he did what frightened men in small power always do. He pressed down. Emma's work doubled. The kitchen flues wanted scouring, she was to do it. The stone floor of the game larder wanted scrubbing, she was to do it tonight after the pots. A cask of vinegar had spilled in the cellar, Carter would see to it, and Cook's protests be hanged. "The girl'll drop, Mr. Crane," Cook said, hands on hips. "She's been on her feet since 5. "Then she may give notice," said Crane, "and go back to York." He watched Emma's face carefully as he said it. Emma looked at the floor and said, "I'll see to the cellar, Mr. Crane." Let him try to break me, she thought, hauling the bucket down the cellar stairs, her arms shaking with exhaustion. I have been hungry, I have been cold. I have watched my mother die in a rented room. He'll need more than vinegar. But that night, lying dressed on her bed waiting for the house to sleep, she understood the true cost of Crane's cruelty. Her body was betraying her. Twice her eyes closed and she jerked awake with her heart pounding, terrified she had slept till morning. When the stable clock finally struck 1, she rose feeling as if her legs belonged to someone else. Tonight, it must be tonight, before he searches again and finds the letter. She took her candle stub, her mother's hat pins, and her shoes in her hand, and went down the attic stairs in her stockinged feet. The house at 1 o'clock was a different country. Moonlight lay in long silver bars across the floors. Furniture that was familiar by day loomed like strangers. Emma crossed the servants' passage, slipped through the baize door, and entered the long gallery, the fastest way east, the way with the creaking floor. She had learned the creaks. Days of walking that gallery with coal scuttles and dusters had drawn her a map. Close to the windows the boards were sound. The third board past the marble table groaned like a dying man. She moved along the window side, slow as honey, her breath loud in her own ears, the portraits of dead Ravenscrofts watching her go. She was 10 feet from the east door when she heard it. A footstep not hers. Emma froze against the shutter of the tall window, and her candle, her unlit, useless candle, nearly slipped from her fingers. At the far end of the gallery, a shape stood in the doorway she had just come through. Tall, still, a dark dressing gown, a head slightly bent as if listening. The Duke. He could not sleep. He rarely could, since his father died, and he had heard, or half heard, the soft sound of the baize door. And now he stood looking down the moonlit gallery directly at the window where a girl in a gray dress pressed herself into the shadow of the shutter. 15 slow heartbeats of silence between them. Emma did not breathe. He sees me, he must see me. Dear God, let the moon. The moon was behind cloud. The window bay was black as a well. But the Duke of Ravenscroft had spent 3 weeks learning the shape of one particular person, the set of the shoulders, the way she held her head, and though he could not have sworn to it in a court of law, he knew. Some quiet, certain part of him knew exactly who stood in the darkness by the third window with her shoes in her hand, on her way to the East Wing. And the East Wing held nothing but old books and older papers. The muniment room, asterisk he thought, and felt the puzzle pieces shift. Emma waited for the voice that would end everything. Who's there? Come out. Fetch Crane, her whole life balanced on the point of a pin. Instead, the Duke did the strangest thing. He turned slowly, as if he had heard nothing and seen nothing and only come to look at the moon. He walked back through the doorway, and he closed the door behind him with a soft, deliberate click that sounded, in the silence, almost like courtesy. Emma stood shaking in the dark for a long time. He didn't see me, she told herself over and over, creeping back to the attic with her heart still hammering. The East Wing abandoned for tonight, the risk suddenly too monstrous. He didn't see me. If he had seen me, I would be finished. He didn't see me. But upstairs in his room, the Duke stood at his window, looking out at the dark park, more awake than he had been in 3 years. She reads Latin. She understands French. She writes letters she posts 2 miles away, and at 1 in the morning she walks toward my father's papers. Tomorrow, he decided, he would begin watching in earnest. The rain began on Sunday and did not stop for 4 days. It was the cold, driving rain of early spring, and the Duke rode out in it anyway to the far farms, where the river was threatening the new lambs. He came back on Wednesday evening soaked to the bone, refused supper, and said he was perfectly well. By Thursday night, Ravenscroft Hall knew better. Emma heard it first as running footsteps over her head had never run, the urgent, stumbling hurry of a house in fear. Then voices on the attic stairs, the valets cracking. Burning alive, I tell you, and talking nonsense. Thomas has ridden for Dr. Mead, but the ford is flooded. The ford was flooded. The doctor was on the other side of it. Emma lay in the dark, listening, telling herself it was nothing to her. He is a Ravenscroft. Their name buried your family. Let his servants tend him, but she was already sitting up. She was already reaching for her dress. Because the truth, the plain, stubborn truth, was this. Emma Ashford had nursed her mother through 2 winters of fever, in a rented room with no doctor and no money for one, keeping her alive on nothing but care and a book of Dr. Butchin's medicine borrowed from a curate. She knew fevers the way sailors know weather. And downstairs, from the sound of it, no one else did. The Duke's bedroom, when she reached its doorway with a can of water as her excuse, was everything Dr. Butchin said a sick room must never be. A fire built up like a furnace. Windows sealed. Blankets piled on the patient in the ancient, deadly belief that a fever must be sweated out. The housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, wringing her hands. The young valet nearly in tears. And in the great bed, half buried in wool, the Duke of Ravenscroft, his face flushed dark, his lips cracked, restless and muttering. The ledgers, he was saying to no one. Father, father, wrong about whom? Emma stood in the doorway, and 9 years of hiding fought one moment of decision. If she stayed silent, he might die. Men did die of this, strong men, in one bad night, cooked by their own well-meaning servants. And if he died, the estate would pass to some cousin, the house would be shut up, and every paper in the muniment room would be carted away or burned. Her father's truth would die in that bed too. That was the reason she gave herself anyway as she crossed the room. The other reason, the memory of a tall man standing patiently in a courtyard while a puppy conquered his boot, she did not examine. Mrs. Finch. Emma's voice came out level and clear, a voice none of them had heard from the scullery girl. The fire must be let down, those blankets must come off all but one, and the window must be opened a hand's width at the top. Mrs. Finch stared. Opened, girl, the night air will kill him. The heat is killing him now. His body is a kettle on the boil and you are feeding the fire. Emma set down her water can and began, quite calmly, folding back the mountain of blankets. I nursed fever for 2 winters. He needs cool cloths, changed the moment they warm his face, his wrists, the back of his neck. He needs willow bark tea if there is any in the still room and barley water, a spoonful at a time, more than he wants. And he needs the air of this room fit to breathe. We can do all of it before the doctor comes, or he can explain to the magistrate why we did nothing. There is a tone that hospitals and nurseries know, the tone of someone who is genuinely certain. Servants recognize it faster than anyone because their lives are spent obeying it. Mrs. Finch hesitated 1 second more, then turned on the valet. You heard her. The still room. Run. What followed was the longest night of Emma's life. She fought the fever the way her mother's had never been fought, with method, hour after hour. Cloths wrung in cool water, changed and changed and changed. The tea coaxed between cracked lips. The fire kept low, the window cracked, the room slowly turning from an oven into a place a man might live. Mrs. Finch obeyed her, then began to anticipate her, and somewhere past 3 in the morning started calling her my dear, without noticing she did it. The Duke was the only one who fought her. He was far away in some burning country of his own, and he thrashed and muttered, and once seized her wrist with shocking strength. "The ledgers," he said, staring straight at her with bright, unseeing eyes. He knew. He knew, and he was afraid. Wrong about whom? You never said. You never said asterisk. "Hush," Emma whispered, her heart going like a hammer. He knew, and he was afraid. The words dropped into her mind and lay there, gleaming, next to her father's letter. The old Duke grew pale and told me to speak of it to no one. "Hush now. Rest." "Don't go," said the Duke of Ravenscroft, with the terrible simplicity of fever, and did not release her wrist. So Emma sat, her hand captive, in the small hours of the night. Mrs. Finch dozed in the armchair. The rain washed against the windows, and the man in the bed shivered and would not settle, turning his head on the pillow like a man searching for something. Emma did then what she had done through 2 winters in a rented room without thinking, what her hands and heart did on their own when someone was sick and the night was long. Softly, barely above a breath, she began to hum. It was an old tune, a strange and particular one, not a hymn, not a country song anyone sang. A lilting minor-key lullaby with an odd little turn in the middle, like a question asked and never answered. Her father had sung it to her all her childhood. "Where does it come from, Papa?" she had asked once. And he had smiled and said, "From a grand lady, Emmy. I heard it long ago in a grand house, sung to a little boy who wouldn't sleep. I only ever heard her sing it once, and I never forgot it." The effect on the Duke was extraordinary. He went still. Not the ominous stillness of sinking, his breathing eased, slowed, deepened, and the restless searching of his head stopped, as if the thing he had been looking for had finally come. His grip on her wrist softened. By the second verse, for the first time in 2 days, the Duke of Ravenscroft slept. Emma sat frozen, her humming dying away, staring at his quiet face. "It's a coincidence," she told herself. "A tune is a tune. He is exhausted, that's all." Toward dawn the fever broke in the old, drenching way, and Mrs. Finch wept with relief, and Emma slipped away to the scullery before the household woke, and became invisible again. Dr. Mead crossed the ford at noon, examined the patient, and announced that whoever had managed that sick room had likely saved his Grace's life. An announcement Mrs. Finch repeated, with embellishments, to the entire servants' hall, while Emma scrubbed pots and wished passionately that the floor would open. Mr. Crane said nothing at all, but his pale eyes found Emma across the kitchen and stayed. The Duke slept most of 2 days. On the 3rd day he was sitting up, weak and hollow-cheeked and entirely himself, when he sent, to Mrs. Finch's astonishment, for the scullery maid. Emma came in her damp apron, her heart in her throat, and stood just inside the door of the room where she had spent that whole secret night. It looked different by daylight. He looked different too, pale, sharp-eyed, watching her with an expression she could not read at all. "They tell me I owe you my life," said the Duke. "They're kind, Your Grace. Mrs. Finch did everything." "Mrs. Finch," said the Duke, "believed night air was poison and has told the entire county so. Don't lie to me. You've a talent for it, but don't." He said it without anger, almost gently, and that frightened her more than anger would have. He was quiet a moment, turning something over. Then, "I remember very little of that night. Voices, the rain, but one thing I remember clearly, and I will ask you plainly." His eyes came up to hers, and they were not fevered now. They were the coolest, most awake eyes she had ever seen. "There was a song, a lullaby, an odd one with a turn in the middle. I have heard it exactly once before in my life, when I was 5 years old, sung by my mother. She died the following year. To my certain knowledge, no other living person knows that tune." The room was very quiet. Somewhere below, a door closed, and both of them heard Crane's measured tread pass along the corridor and pause, just fractionally, outside. The Duke did not glance at the door. He kept his eyes on Emma and asked, very softly, "Where did you learn my mother's song? Where did you learn my mother's song?" The question hung in the quiet room, and Emma understood, with terrible clarity, that her whole masquerade had come down to the next 10 seconds. She could not tell the truth. The truth had a road, and the road led straight to her name. My father heard it in this house, Your Grace. Long ago, my father, Thomas Ashford, the man convicted of robbing yours. One honest sentence and she would be out the gates by nightfall or worse. But he had told her not to lie, and something in his face said he would know. So Emma did the only thing left. She told a truth with the heart cut out of it. From my father, Your Grace. Her voice stayed steady. Her hands, folded in her apron, did not. He sang it to me when I was small. He said he heard it once, many years ago, in a grand house, a lady singing to her little boy who wouldn't sleep. He said he only heard it the one time and never forgot it. The Duke went very still. A lady singing to her little boy who wouldn't sleep. He had been that boy. He could remember the candle, the blue bed curtains, his mother's cool hand. Some stranger, some visitor, some man of business waiting in a corridor of this house nearly 30 years ago had passed by an open nursery door and carried his mother's voice away inside him and given it to a daughter, and the daughter had brought it home again and sung a dead woman's song over her sleeping son. He found he could not speak for a moment. Your father, he said at last, what was his business that took him into grand houses? He kept accounts, Your Grace. The narrowest of paths, and she walked it. He's away now. We came down in the world. What is his name? Carter, Your Grace. There it was, the lie, the necessary one, laid gently on top of all the truth like a stone on a grave. The Duke looked at her for a long, level moment, and Emma made herself hold his eyes, because innocent women did not look at the floor. He knew, not the whole of it, but she saw him see the stone. She saw him decide deliberately not to lift it, yet. Thank you, said the Duke, for my life and for the song. And then, as she curtsied and turned, one more thing, you'll leave the scullery. Mrs. Finch needs a still-room maid, someone who can read a receipt and label a bottle. You read, I think. A beat, yes, Your Grace. I thought you might. Was there for a quarter of a second, something almost like dry humor in his face. That's all. In the corridor outside, Emma passed Mr. Crane, standing near the door with a tray of correspondence he had no obvious reason to be holding. His pale eyes followed her all the way to the stairs. The still room changed everything. It changed her hours, her freedom, the map of her days. The still room lay off the *east* corridor, past the old library, 20 steps from a black oak door with iron bands. Emma spent her first afternoon there labeling bottles with a hand that shook, hardly daring to believe her fortune. Later, much later, she would understand it had not been fortune at all. The Duke had moved her there the way a chess player moves a piece, to see what she would do next. She lasted 4 days. On the 5th night, with the household asleep and the moon decently clouded, Emma stood in front of the muniment room door with her mother's hat pins and her stub of candle, and did the thing she had crossed a county to do. Her father had been right. The lock was old and it was proud, and pride is a weakness. It took her half an hour, 2 bent pins and 1 moment of black despair. And then the heavy bolt turned over with a sound like a knuckle cracking, and the door of the Ravenscroft archives swung open on 9 years of hope. The room was long and narrow and smelled of dust and leather and cold stone, deed boxes on shelves, bundles of letters tied with legal tape, and along the far wall in ranked rows, the estate ledgers, tall books bound in calf, their spines lettered in gilt, year after year after year. Emma's candle trembled as she found them. 1815, 1816, her father's years. She pulled down 1816, the year of the trial, the year of the missing money, laid it on the table and opened it. And there was his handwriting. She had to stop then with her hand flat on the page and tears burning her eyes. Column after column of that beautiful, upright hand, neat as printed type. The hand that had signed her copybooks and written *Emmy, my brave girl from a debtor's prison. He had touched these pages. It was like finding his footprints after 9 years. Work, she told herself fiercely. Cry later, work now. She knew what to look for. Her father's letters had drilled it into her. The Michaelmas quarter, Emmy, the rents from the northern farms. Nearly £4,000 received, entered by me, and at trial the ledger showed it never received at all, only figures in my hand I never wrote, sums I never made. Someone changed the entries or changed the pages. Find the Michaelmas quarter. Emma turned the leaves toward autumn. July, August. September the 29th, Michaelmas itself, quarter day, the day the rents came in. The page was gone. Not blank. Gone. Cut out close to the binding with something sharp, leaving a stub of paper like a healed scar. Whoever had done it had been careful, the ledger closed and shelved. You would never know. Only here, open under a candle, did the truth show. Between the 28th of September and the 4th of October, 1816, the estate's memory had been surgically removed. Emma sat down slowly on the cold bench. She had prepared herself for anything but this. For proof of guilt, for proof of innocence, not for absence. The page that could have saved her father had been sliced out of the world, and with it, 9 years of hope. No, she whispered. No, there has to be. There was, not salvation, but something. Because Emma was her father's daughter and her father was an accountant, and accountants know a truth the rest of the world forgets. Figures do not live alone. Every ledger entry echoes somewhere in receipts, in bank books, in the rough day books clerks scribble before the fair copy is made. She began pulling down other volumes, faster now, the candle burning low. The day book for 1816 missing entirely from the shelf. The bank passbook missing. Someone had been thorough. But someone had also, more recently, been clumsy. It was the ledger for last year, 1825, shelved out of order, its ribbon marker still between the pages, that stopped her. She opened it merely to check the sequence and found herself staring. Here were the same northern farms, the same rents. And here, in a cramped, careful hand that was not her father's and not the old steward's, the Michaelmas receipts were entered at figures that made her frown. Emma had grown up on her father's knee doing sums for sport. She knew what northern farm rents ran to. She had heard Cook grumble about what the tenants paid. The figures in the book were short. Not by much, by a sliver, a shaving, 3%, the kind of shortfall no gentleman would ever notice. Every quarter, every year she checked, 1825, 1824, 1823, the same cramped hand, the same shaved figures. The theft had never stopped. Whoever ruined Thomas Ashford had not done it to cover one crime. They had done it to keep the door open, and for 9 years, patient as a tick, they had gone on quietly bleeding the Ravenscroft estate, hidden behind the conviction of an innocent man. Her father in prison was not the aftermath of the crime. He was its camouflage. Emma stood over the ledgers, cold to the bone, and heard her own heart beating in the silent room. And then she saw the footprints. Her candle, guttering low, threw its light sideways across the table, and sideways light shows what downward light hides. The fine gray dust on the tabletop was disturbed. Not by her. She had worked at the near end. At the far end, where the shelved ledgers stood, the dust showed the clean sweep of a sleeve, the round ghost of a candlestick's base, and on the stone floor beneath, leading from the shelves to the door, the unmistakable half-moon prints of a man's heeled shoes. Emma bent close, her skin crawling. The prints lay on top of the dust, sharp-edged, fresh, days old at most. Someone else had stood exactly where she stood, taken down these same books by candlelight in secret and locked the door behind him. With the only key. A clock somewhere in the house struck 3, very far away. And it seemed to Emma, straightening up in that cold, narrow room with her dying candle, that she could feel the whole silent hall around her like a living thing, and somewhere in it, awake or asleep, the owner of those heeled shoes, who knew what she now knew, who had already cut one page out of history and buried one innocent man. He searched my trunk, she thought. He watches me across the kitchen. And now we have both stood in this room. The question was no longer whether Mr. Crane suspected Emma Carter. The question was how long he intended to let her live at Ravenscroft Hall, and what he would do when he learned whose daughter she was. Emma did not go back to the muniment room for 6 days. Fear kept her out, fear and the healed footprints in the dust, but the ledgers pulled at her like a tide. The shaved figures, the cramped hand, the theft that had never stopped. It was all still there, locked behind the black oak door, evidence of everything and proof of nothing. Proof needed the missing daybook, the missing passbook, the missing page asterisk. And those existed somewhere. A man who kept stealing needed his true records the way a spider needs its web. He would keep them close. He would keep them safe. She had to go back. She had to search the room properly, the deed boxes, the letter bundles, the dark shelves at the far end her candle had never reached. On the 7th night, when the clock struck 1, Emma went. The lock knew her now. It gave up in 10 minutes. She slipped inside, shielded her candle, and set to work along the far wall, box after box, her ears straining at every settling beam. An hour passed. Her candle burned down to 2 fingers. She was kneeling over a deed box marked asterisk North FARMS, Lisa's asterisk, so deep in concentration that the world had shrunk to paper and dust. And the door opened. Not with a bang. That was the terrible thing. It opened quietly, almost politely, and the draft of it laid her candle flame flat, and a tall figure stepped through with a lamp in his hand and closed the door behind him and turned the key. The scrape of that lock was the loudest sound Emma had ever heard. "Please don't get up," said the Duke of Ravenscroft. "You'll knock over the candle, and I've only just recovered from one disaster in this house." Emma got up anyway. Her legs did it without her. Her body had decided to face ruin standing. The lamplight found her white face, her dusty hands, the open deed box, the ledger she saw it now, too late, left stacked on the table like a signed confession. Run was impossible. Lie was absurd. She stood in the wreck of 9 years' hope and said nothing at all. The Duke set his lamp on the table. He was fully dressed at 2 in the morning, which told her everything about how surprised he wasn't. For a moment he looked not at her but at the stacked ledgers, reading the gilt years on their spines, and something in his face tightened. 1816, he said. "You went straight to it, didn't you? The first night 6 days ago, straight to 1816. His eyes came up. "You didn't even glance at the strongbox shelf, and the deed box you've opened tonight holds leases, not valuables. In 3 weeks under my roof you have stolen nothing, taken nothing, asked for nothing. You scrub floors that would shame my housemaids, and you speak French you pretend not to hear. And at night you pick a lock my own solicitor needs permission to pass, to read asterisk account books." He came a step closer. "I have been watching you since the night you cleared broken glass from my dining room floor with the hands of a gentlewoman and ink on your fingers. I said nothing. I watched. I am done watching. Who are you?" "Your Grace." "And before you answer," he said quite softly, "know this. I have heard a great deal of lying in this house. My father died of it, died confused and afraid, speaking of these very books, so I have developed an ear. Lie to me now, and whatever trouble you are in, I will add to it. Tell me the truth, and I promise nothing except that I will listen to the end." The candle guttered. Somewhere far off, the house ticked and settled around the two of them, locked in a stone room with 9 years of paper. And Emma, exhausted, cornered, and so tired of carrying it alone that her very bones ached, made her choice. She would give him the truth, most of it, the shape of it, everything but the name, because the name was a noose, and she had a father alive at the end of it. "My father kept accounts," she said. "Great houses, great families, he audited their books, managed their affairs. He was good, Your Grace. He was asterisk honest, you may believe that or not, but hear it. 9 years ago he found something wrong in a client's ledgers. Money going missing quietly, cleverly, over years. He told his client. His client turned pale and swore him to silence, said he'd look into it himself." Her voice had gone low and steady, the voice of something rehearsed 9,000 times in the dark. 3 days later, my father was arrested. The books had been altered in his hand, they said, forged entries, false sums. He was convicted on paper he never wrote, and he has been in prison ever since. My mother died of it, and the man who really changed those figures is still free, still stealing. She looked at the ledgers on the table. Still stealing here, Your Grace. From you, I can show you. Whatever the Duke had expected, a runaway, a spy, a fortune huntress, it was not this. He stood very still. "Show me," he said. So she did. She opened 1825 under the lamp and walked him through it as her father had walked her through columns as a child. The northern rents, the shaved figures, 3% skimmed off quarter after quarter in that cramped, careful hand. She fetched down 1824 and 1823 and showed him the same. Then she opened 1816 and turned to Michaelmas and let him see the scar in the binding where the page had been cut away. The Duke put his finger on the cut edge and was silent for a long time. "My father," he said finally, and his voice had changed, gone quiet and young, spent his last hour gripping my wrist and talking about ledgers. "I was wrong, Edward. God forgive me, I think I was wrong about him. He never said about whom. I have wondered for 3 years. He looked up. Your father's client 9 years ago, the man who found the theft and was ruined for it. It was my father he warned. This is the house, say it plainly." "Yes," said Emma, "it was this house." "Then give me your father's name." And there it was, the noose, offered gently across a lamplit table. One word, one name, and the papers of the trial would tell him the rest before breakfast. Ashford, the thief Ashford, the forger. 9 years of official truth against the word of the forger's daughter, who had entered his house under a false name with forged references and a picked lock. "No," said Emma. The Duke's eyebrows rose. "Not yet. Your Grace, you promised to listen to the end, so hear this too. The moment you have his name, you have a convicted man, tried and sentenced, and me a proven liar in your scullery. Everything I have shown you tonight becomes a criminal's daughter tampering with your books. You would be a fool not to think it, and you are not a fool." Her chin came up. "But the man who cut that page doesn't know what I know. He doesn't know anyone is counting behind him. Catch him first, catch him with his figures, catch him asterisk stealing, and then I'll give you my father's name and the trial records and every letter, and you may judge us with the truth on the table instead of 9-year-old lies. That is my bargain. It's the only one I have." Silence. The lamp hissed softly. The Duke of Ravenscroft looked at the small, dusty, iron-eyed woman standing in the ruin of her own secret, bargaining with him at 2 in the morning as if she held the stronger hand, and the astonishing thing, he reflected, was that she did. He could break her with a word, and he would lose the only person in the world who seemed to want the same truth he did. "You realize," he said at last, "that I already know more than you think. I know the tune your father heard in this house. I know roughly when he must have stood in that corridor to hear it. I could find the name myself in a week of looking." "Then you'll have found it," said Emma steadily, "and not been given it. There's a difference, Your Grace. I've learned to care about it." Something moved in his face, the ghost, almost, of respect. He straightened and walked slowly along the shelf of ledgers, trailing one finger across the gilt years, and when he spoke again it was toward the books. "Since my father died, I have not trusted these accounts. I couldn't have told you why. Grief, I decided, grief makes men suspicious. Every audit came back clean, every figure balanced." He stopped. "You've shown me tonight why they balanced. The books were kept by the same hand that robbed them." He turned. "So we come to it, you know, and I know whose shoes made those marks in the dust. No, don't look surprised. I saw the prints 4 nights ago. Why do you think the door was watched? There is one man in this house who has carried the archive key for 30 years. One man who served here through 1816. One man my father trusted with everything, his keys, his letters, his private study." He said it without heat, which made it worse. "Crane was my father's man before I could walk. If you are right, if we are right, Then the person who ruined your father and robbed mine has run this household over my head for my entire life. He hired every servant in it. He reads the post before I see it." The Duke came back to the table into the lamplight, and for the first time Emma saw how alone he was, how long he had been alone, in his own house, in his own grief, surrounded by an army recruited by his enemy. "So, Miss Carter, since that is the name we are keeping for now." He put out his hand across the ledgers formally, as one man of business to another, and there was grim humor at the edge of his mouth. "It appears there are 2 hunters in Ravenscroft Hall, and we have been stalking the same beast from opposite sides. I propose we stop startling each other's game." Emma looked at the offered hand. Somewhere above them, floors away, the house slept on, and one man dreamed his patient dreams, not knowing that in the cold room at the heart of it, all his 2 enemies stood face to face over the wreckage of his lie. She took the Duke's hand. It was warm, and it closed on hers carefully, as if he too could feel that something irreversible was being done. "To the end of it, then," said Emma Ashford, "whatever it costs." She would remember those words later, in a cell in the village lockup, on the worst night of her life, and wonder if God had been listening. There is a strange sweetness in conspiracy. Emma had not expected that. Their war was conducted in whispers and grew its own small rituals. Twice a week, when the house slept, she would slip down to the muniment room, where the door now opened to her own key. The Duke had ordered a copy cut in the market town, by a locksmith who knew nothing, paid in coin that passed through no account Crane could see. They worked at the long table with the lamp shaded low, Emma combing the ledgers year by year, building the case figure by figure, the Duke beside her with his father's letters and diaries, hunting the other end of the same thread. They were building an arithmetic of proof. Emma's method was her father's. Figures do not live alone. Crane's shaved rents had to echo somewhere in the world in the tenant's own receipts, in the corn merchant's books in the bank. So the Duke began, very casually, to ride out. He visited the northern farms about the spring lambs and came home with polite conversation, and folded inside his glove careful notes of what each tenant swore he had actually paid. Emma set the true figures against the ledger's figures, quarter by quarter, and the gap between them grew into a long, damning column. 9 years of it. It came by her arithmetic to over £11,000 of fortune, siphoned off in slivers too thin to see. He could have bought an estate of his own, the Duke said one night, staring at her totals. "He doesn't want an estate," Emma said. "Estates are visible. My father used to say there are 2 kinds of thieves, the hungry ones and the patient ones. The hungry ones want money. The patient ones want the asterisk secret asterisk. It becomes the whole meaning of their lives, being cleverer than everyone, every single day, and never being seen." She looked up. "It's the patient ones you must never corner until you're ready. They've spent years planning what they'll do if anyone comes close." She would remember saying that too. But the ledgers were only half of what happened at that table, and both of them knew it. It arrived in small things. The Duke learned that she took no sugar and began, without comment, bringing down the tea himself on a tray, the Duke of Ravenscroft, carrying a tea tray through his own sleeping house like a burglar, because the kitchen must never know 2 cups had gone missing. Emma learned that he rubbed the back of his neck when a page of his father's diary hurt him, and she learned to pass over those pages gently, asking nothing. He began saying asterisk, "We'll need the bank's figures. We're close now," and the word did something to her that she refused to examine. Once, reaching for the same ledger, their hands touched and both of them withdrew, and apologized with an absurd formality that made her laugh before she could stop herself. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. He looked at her as if she had struck a match in a dark room. "You should do that more often," he said, and then, appalled at himself, became extremely interested in the year 1822. They never spoke of it. She was, as far as the world knew, a still-room maid, and he was a duke, and between those 2 words lay a gulf that no candlelight could bridge. Emma reminded herself of this nightly, sternly, like a catechism. When this ends, however it ends, he learns your name. Ashford. And even if he forgives the name, dukes do not marry accountants' daughters, and accountants' daughters who let themselves dream deserve what they get. Then she would go down on Tuesday night anyway, and her heart would do the same foolish thing when the lamplight found his face. One night he asked about her father, not the case, the asterisk man, and Emma, who had spoken to no living soul about him in 9 years except through smuggled letters, found she could not stop. The peppermints, the sums done for sport, the way he raised his hat to washerwomen exactly as he did to countesses. The Duke listened with his chin on his hand, and at the end he said quietly, "You realize what you've described, an honest man in a dishonest world. My father used to say they were the most dangerous thing alive because everyone else has to organize around them." He paused. "I think our fathers would have liked each other. I think, in fact, they probably did, and that is the whole tragedy in one sentence." Emma looked down at her columns of figures until she could see them again. 2 more weeks, she wrote to her father that night in the attic by her stub of candle. Perhaps 3. "Papa, I cannot tell you everything, but hold fast, I am no longer alone in this. There is someone here who believes, someone with the power to reopen everything. I dare not write more, even to you. Burn this one. Burn it, Papa, promise me." She sealed it, addressed it as always Mr. T.A., care of the chaplain, and hid it inside her stays to post from the village on her half-day, 2 days off. She never posted it. Because the next morning, hurrying down the attic stairs at 5 with her boots in her hand, Emma slipped on the worn 4th step, caught herself on the rail, safe nothing. A servant stumble in the dark, and did not hear, and could not have heard, the whisper of paper sliding from her loosened stays into the shadow at the foot of the stairs. She was in the still room, elbow-deep in rose petals when she missed it. The world stopped. She retraced every step twice with her heart in her mouth. The stairs, the corridor, the landing, nothing. Nothing but swept boards. And the housemaids swept the back stairs at 6, and whatever they found they gave by iron rule to Mr. Crane. "It isn't signed," she told herself, standing very still among the roses. "It never carries his name or mine. Mr. T.A. initials, a chaplain, it could be anyone's letter. Any maid's sweetheart, it isn't signed." All true, and all useless, because a letter is more than a name. In the butler's pantry, behind a locked door, Mr. Crane sat with the unfolded page in the cold light of the window and read it for the 4th time. He was not looking at the words any longer. He was looking at the hand. 30 years a butler, a lifetime of reading upside-down letters on silver trays. But this hand he knew better than any in the world, because for 2 years, 9 years ago, he had studied it the way a forger must have practiced it by lamplight, its loops and ligatures, until he could pour false figures through an honest man's pen. He had put a man in prison with this handwriting. He would have known it in his grave. Thomas Ashford's hand, feminine now, softened, quickened, but the bones of it, the schooling of it, unmistakable. The daughter then. The little girl who used to wait in the courtyard eating peppermints. Grown and inside the house, and he read it again, no longer alone. Someone here who believes, someone with the power to reopen everything. There was only one person at Ravenscroft Hall with the power to reopen everything. Crane sat for a long time quite motionless while the sounds of the waking house went on without him. Strangely, what he felt first was not fear. It was something closer to professional admiration, the trunk with nothing in it, the mended stockings, the false letter from York with its convincing Mrs. Prout. 9 years old when I ruined her father and she built all that. Blood, he thought, told. The father had also been thorough. The father had also been clever. The father had also been dealt with. And there it was, the old solution, rising as smoothly as it had risen 9 years ago, wearing the same reasonable face. Not violence. Crane despised violence. It was the tool of stupid men. Paper. Paper and reputation, the quiet machinery of respectable ruin. She was a servant under a false name with forged references. That alone would jail her. But she must not fall alone. She must fall in a way that poisoned everything she had touched, every figure, every whisper she might have poured into his Grace's ear. She must fall as her father fell, as a asterisk thief asterisk. Because who listens to the arithmetic of a convicted thief's convicted daughter? He would need something of value, something small, famous within the household and beyond argument, something no jury of tradesmen could hear about without hardening their hearts. Crane folded the letter with 2 exact creases and locked it in his private drawer, beneath the false-bottomed tray, next to a slim daybook and a bank passbook that the world believed lost. Then he took out his keys and stood, and his pale eyes had the calm of a man whose decision is entirely behind him. Upstairs in her sitting room, the Duke's grandmother's ruby brooch lay in its velvet case, where it had lain, cherished and famous for 60 years. That evening, passing through the kitchen, Emma found Mr. Crane unexpectedly mild. He inquired after the still-room. He observed that she had proved a better hire than he had feared, and that Mrs. Prute of York had been right to praise her. And he smiled at her, the first smile in all her weeks at Ravenscroft Hall, a dry, thin, patient smile that stopped her blood. He knows. She had no proof, nothing she could take to the Duke beyond a smile and a shiver. But walking back down the east corridor, Emma understood, with the clear, cold instinct of the hunted, that somewhere out of sight a door had already closed, and that the trap she and the Duke had spent 5 weeks building was no longer the only trap in the house. She was right, it sprang in 3 days. It began, as disasters in great houses do, with a bell. Thursday morning, 9:30. Emma was in the still room straining rosewater when every bell on the kitchen board seemed to ring at once, and a housemaid burst in white-faced. The whole staff was wanted in the great hall. Everyone, at once. Emma dried her hands and went, and knew before she reached the door. She knew from the silence. 40 servants stood ranked on the black and white marble like mourners, and before them stood Mrs. Finch, who had been crying, and Mr. Crane, who had not. The Duke stood on the stairs, very still, one hand on the banister. Her Grace's ruby brooch, Crane announced to the hall in the flat voice of official grief, is gone from its case. The late Duchess's brooch, 60 years in this family. A ripple went through the servants like wind through corn. His Grace has authorized a search of the household. Every box, every bed, every trunk. If it has merely been mislaid, we shall all thank God together. If it has not, he let the silence finish the sentence. Then Ravenscroft Hall does not forgive. Search of the household. Emma stood with her hands folded and her face calm and her mind running like a hunted thing. This is it. This is the trap. It will be in my room. He's had 3 days. It will be in my room, and there is nothing I can do, nothing. I cannot run. Running is confession. Her eyes found the Duke on the stairs. Look at me, she willed him. You know what this is. He did not look at her. Not once. His face was gray and shuttered, a stranger's face, and he stared over the heads of his servants at nothing at all. The search took 2 hours. They did it properly, in pairs, Mrs. Finch and the head footman going room by room while the staff waited below in a silence that grew teeth. Emma stood through all of it like a woman standing in the sea, feeling the ground being pulled away underneath her, grain by grain, wave by wave. She thought of her candle stub, her hat pins, the copied key to the muniment room sewn into her mattress. The key. Dear God, they would find the key, and the key would need explaining, and the only man who could explain it was standing on the stairs refusing to look at her. At 11:15, Mrs. Finch came down the great staircase carrying something in both hands as if it were hot, and her good soft face was destroyed, and she could not look at anyone. She was carrying Emma's mattress sticking, slit open. And on it, wrapped in a gray woolen stocking Emma had darned herself, lay the ruby brooch of the Duchess of Ravenscroft, flashing in the morning light like a wound. "In the attic," Mrs. Finch said, to the floor. "The stillroom maid's bed." Every head in the hall turned. 40 pairs of eyes, and Emma stood alone in the middle of the marble under all of them. And the strange thing, the thing she would remember all her life, was that her chief feeling was not terror but a vast, weary recognition. So this is how it felt. Papa. This is exactly how it felt that autumn. The room turning. Everyone you cooked for and worked beside, turning all at once into witnesses. "That is not mine," she said quite clearly. "I have never touched it, it was put there." "Put there," Crane repeated gently as if being fair. "By whom, girl? Who in this house would do such a thing?" And then, with the timing of a man who has rehearsed alone in a locked pantry, he turned to the stairs and let his voice fill the hall. "Your Grace, I had hoped to spare the household this. But the wickedness is worse than theft, and it must all come out now. This woman is not Emma Carter. There is no Emma Carter. Her references are forged. I have written to York. There is no Mrs. Prout, no house, no service." A paper appeared from his breast pocket, unfolded with 2 exact creases. "And there is this, dropped by her own carelessness on the back stairs in her own hand. A letter to a prisoner." "That is my letter," Emma said. "Give it." "Dearest Papa," read Mr. Crane. "Don't asterisk. Be patient, I am closer than ever." His voice was soft and it carried like a bell. "Closer to what asterisk, one asks. The lady declines to sign her name, but there is no need." He lowered the paper and looked at her, pale eyes in a face of sorrowful duty, and drove the knife home in front of 40 witnesses. "I knew her father's handwriting the moment I saw this page, for it once filled the ledgers of this very estate. This is the daughter of Thomas Ashford, the forger Ashford, convicted of robbing his late Grace of thousands, these 9 years in debtor's prison. His child, come back under a false name with false papers to finish the family business. And I ask your Grace," he turned to the stairs, and bowed, "whether the brooch in her bed requires any further explanation." The hall did not gasp. It was worse. It went silent, the deep silence of a story making sense. Ashford. The older servants knew the name. Emma watched it move through them like frost through water. Cook's hand went to her mouth. The little kitchen maid who shared her extra bread stepped backward half a step, and that half step broke something in Emma that all the rest had not. She turned to the staircase, and the last of her caution burned away like paper. "Your Grace," her voice rang off the marble, "you know why I came to this house. You know what is in those books." "That will do." The Duke's voice came down flat and cold, and it was not his voice, not the voice of the lamp and the tea tray, and we're close now. He descended 2 steps and looked at her at last, and his eyes were the eyes of a portrait, correct, distant, dead. "You entered my household under a false name with forged characters. That much is confessed from your own mouth. My grandmother's brooch was found in your bed. What you asterisk, no asterisk, madam, and whose daughter you are, the magistrates may untangle. It is no longer my concern." He turned to the butler, and Emma watched him do it, watched him turn away from her in front of the whole world. "Crane, send to the village for the constable. The law is the law. Let it do as it sees fit." "Your Grace," said Crane, and in the depths of those pale eyes something gleamed and was gone, like a fish in dark water. Emma stood on the marble in the ring of eyes while they sent for the constable, and the strangest details printed themselves on her forever. The smell of beeswax, a blackbird singing idiotically outside the tall windows, Mrs. Finch weeping into her apron, and the Duke of Ravenscroft already climbing the stairs, already leaving, his back straight and unhurried, a man going back to his letters. "He never asked me," she thought, numb. "He never even asked me if I took it." They gave her 10 minutes and Mrs. Finch's chaperonage to pack her trunk, the trunk with the slit mattress beside it, the trunk she had carried in with such hope 5 weeks ago. At the bottom of it, under the Sunday shawl, her fingers found her mother's Bible, and Emma held on to it the way drowning people hold things, all the way down the back stairs, past the silent kitchen, out through the servants' door she had first entered in the rain. The constable was a decent, embarrassed man with a cart. It was market day. The whole village saw them come down the high street, and the whole village would talk of it for a year. The lockup was a single stone room behind the courthouse, with a bench, a bucket, a window the size of a Bible, and a door of iron studs that closed with the same sound. Exactly the same sound, she thought, and nearly laughed, and wept instead, as the muniment room's lock turning over. Night came early to a room like that. Emma sat on the bench with her mother's Bible on her knees and let it all come down on her at last, because there was no one left to be brave for. Tomorrow, or the day after, the magistrates. The forged references undeniable. The brooch, 60 years famous, found in her bed. The name Ashford lying over all of it like a grave slab. They gave her father 14 years for paper. What would they give the daughter who came back with false papers and was caught, as all the world would say, red-handed? Prison. Or transportation. They still transported women. She had read of it, the hulks, and then a ship, and the other side of the earth. And her father would hear of it in his cell from some kind, murmuring chaplain, and he would understand that she had failed, that Crane had won twice over, and that the last thing his daughter's love had accomplished was to hand their enemy the perfect end to his story. The Ashfords, father and daughter, bad blood, born thieves. No one would ever count those figures again. Crane had not just beaten her. He had buried the truth so deep it could never be dug up, because now every word of it would come from convict mouths. But that was not the worst. Emma pressed her forehead against the cold Bible and made herself look at the worst, because lying to herself was the one luxury she had never allowed. The worst was the staircase, the gray shuttered face. It is no longer my concern. She had known better. That was the unbearable part. She had known. She had recited it like a catechism night after night. When he learns your name, it ends. Dukes are dukes. Do not dream. And then he had carried tea trays through a sleeping house and said we, and looked at her when she laughed as if she were a lit match. And she had dreamed anyway, oh, worse than dreamed. She had trusted asterisk. She had stood in that hall this morning absolutely certain in her bones, that at any moment he would come down those stairs and stop it. He had come down 2 steps, to order the constable. You fool, Emma whispered to the dark, to herself, only to herself. You poor, lonely fool. He watched you for 5 weeks. You never once asked yourself what he was watching for asterisk. Far away across the fields, the stable clock at Ravenscroft Hall struck midnight, thin and silver over the dark country. In the great house every window was black except one. In the butler's pantry a lamp burned late, and Mr. Crane sat beneath it with a glass of his Grace's port at his elbow, writing out, in his cramped and careful hand, a fair statement of events for the magistrates. He permitted himself at the end of it one small, dry, patient smile. 9 years ago he had done all this alone, and it had held. This time had been easier. This time, he reflected, sanding the wet ink, the Duke himself had turned the key. To understand what happened at Ravenscroft Hall that night, you must go back 3 days, to a Monday evening, and a study door, and a Duke standing alone at his window with his world coming quietly apart. Because the Duke of Ravenscroft had known about the brooch before it was ever missing. It had happened by the purest chance, the kind of chance that decides everything. Monday evening, restless, he had gone up to his grandmother's old sitting room as he sometimes did to think. The room lay dark, and through the half-open door he had seen, by shielded candlelight, the impossible, Mr. Crane, standing before the velvet case, lifting the ruby brooch out of it with a gloved and reverent hand and slipping it into his coat. Every instinct in the Duke had surged toward the door. Now, seize him now, thief, caught in the act. And then he had stopped in the dark of the corridor with his hand already raised. Stopped, because 5 weeks of ledgers had taught him exactly how this man worked, and because a voice in his memory said, quite clearly, in Emma's calm nighttime tone, "It's the patient ones you must never corner until you're ready. They've spent years planning what they'll do if anyone comes close." Caught now, Crane was a butler with a brooch in his pocket, a thief, dismissed, jailed for one theft, and the archive of 9 years' crime never found. The day book, the pass book, the cut page. Hidden somewhere only Crane knew, and Crane would rot silently in prison before he gave them up. And Thomas Ashford would rot too forever, an innocent man convicted on evidence that no longer existed. No, a brooch was not stolen to be sold. Crane despised money he could not hide. A brooch was stolen to be found, which meant it would be found in someone's bed, and the Duke, standing in that dark corridor feeling the cold spread through him, knew precisely whose. This was the counter-trap. Crane knew, somehow, everything, and this was Emma's ruin being carried down the corridor in a gloved hand. He could stop it, and lose the proof forever. Or he could let it happen, let the trap close on her, play the cold Duke, the deceived master, so perfectly that Crane, triumphant, vindicated, safe, would finally do the one thing 9 patient years had never made him do, relax. And then, with victory in his hands and the Ashford threat destroyed, Crane would go to wherever his true records slept, either to gloat or to burn them at last, because the letter on the back stairs had taught him that hiding places can fail. The Duke stood in the dark corridor for a long time. She will believe it, he thought. That's the price. For it to work, it must work on her too. Crane reads faces the way she reads figures. One warm glance from me and he'll smell the floor of the trap. She will stand in my hall and be called a thief and look to me, and I will turn away. She will spend a night in a cell believing I abandoned her. She will hate me, and she will be right too. He thought of a lamplit table and a laugh like a struck match, and to the end of it then, whatever it costs. "Forgive me," said the Duke of Ravenscroft quietly to no one, and went downstairs to send 2 letters, one to Sir John Purefoy, the magistrate, a man his father had trusted like a brother, and one to his solicitor in the market town. Both letters said, in essence, the same astonishing thing: be ready. Say nothing. And whatever you hear from Ravenscroft Hall in the next 3 days, believe none of it. So when the bell rang on Thursday morning, when Mrs. Finch came down the stairs carrying ruin in both hands, when Crane unfolded his letter with 2 exact creases and drove his knife home, the Duke stood on his staircase and gave the performance of his life, with his heart breaking quietly inside it. It is no longer my concern. 2 steps down, the constable, the turned back. Every word placed like a stone, and behind his shuttered face, a single thought, over and over, as they led her away with her mother's Bible clutched to her chest. "Look at me one more time and I am lost. Don't look at me. Hold on, Emma, one night. Give me one night." Crane gave him less than that. At 1:30 in the morning, Emma awake on her bench in the lockup, the great house dark, the port glass empty in the pantry. A lamp came down the east corridor of Ravenscroft Hall, moving without hurry, carried by a man who had waited 9 years to be finally, perfectly safe. Mr. Crane had considered the matter from every side as he considered everything. The girl was destroyed. Her testimony was a convict's raving now. But her letter had said someone here believes, and though His Grace's conduct on the staircase had been everything Crane could wish, a careful man tidied up. The true records had served their purpose. £11,000 sat untraceable where it had always sat. It was time, at last, for the fire. He unlocked the muniment room with the key that had lived 30 years on his belt, hung the lamp on its hook, and went. And this was the beautiful, the fatal thing, not to the shelves. He went to the far corner, to the 3rd flagstone from the wall, the one with the chipped lip. He knelt, worked the stone up with the flat of a chisel, and lifted from the dry hollow beneath it a package wrapped in oilcloth. A slim daybook, a bank passbook, and one folded leaf of ledger paper, cut close to the binding, 9 years old. "Thank you, Crane," said the Duke of Ravenscroft, from the darkness by the door. "We could have searched a year and never found that stone." The lamp showed it all as the shadows moved. The Duke, fully dressed, stepping from behind the great oak press. Sir John Purefoy the magistrate, grim as granite, from the other side. the Duke's solicitor with his notebook already open, and filling the doorway the head groom and 2 footmen, the 3 servants in the house hired personally by the old Duke, the only 3 Crane had never chosen. 5 witnesses, and Mr. Crane on his knees on the cold floor with everything in his hands. It must be recorded in fairness that he was magnificent for exactly 4 seconds. The pale eyes flickered once to the door, the window, the lamp measured every distance, found everyone impossible and went still. Then he rose, brushed the dust from his knees and said, in the flat voice of official grief, "Your Grace, I received information that the Ashford girl had an accomplice and hidden papers. I came to secure them for the magistrates." "At 1:30, said Sir John Purefoy, alone with a chisel, "hand them to me." What was in the oilcloth hanged him figuratively. This story spills no blood, though for a moment, reading, Sir John looked as if he could have wished it. The daybook, in Crane's own cramped hand, was the true record 9 years of false ledgers had been built upon. Every shaved rent, every quarter, every year, a masterpiece of patient theft, kept as such men always keep them, because the secret is worthless if even its keeper cannot admire it. The passbook traced the money to an account in a false name in a Leeds bank, and the folded page, the cut page, Michaelmas 1816, showed Thomas Ashford's true entries. The northern rents received in full in his neat upright hand, exactly as he had sworn through 4 days of trial and 9 years of prison. But it was the last thing in the oilcloth that made the room go silent, a thing Emma had never known existed, that even the Duke had never guessed. A letter, old, creased in the late Duke's own hand, addressed to Crane, dated 3 days before Thomas Ashford's arrest and never sent to anyone, taken clearly from the old man's desk after his death. The Duke read it once, went white, and passed it to Sir John, and Sir John read it aloud in the voice men use in church. "Crane Ashford has come to me with his suspicions and his arithmetic, and God help me, the figures point where I cannot bear to look. 30 years you have kept my house. I write this to say I intend to put the question to you plainly man to man on Friday, and I pray you will make a fool of me. If there is any truth in it, I ask only this. Tell me yourself and spare my house the scandal, and I will deal with you privately as one who once loved you. R." He had never put the question. By Friday, Thomas Ashford was in irons and the ledgers were in a forger's hand, and the old Duke, confronted with courtroom proof against the accuser instead, had chosen, in doubt and dread, to believe the story that spared his house, and had lain dying 3 years ago whispering, "I was wrong, Edward. I think I was wrong about him," while the man he had once loved stood at the foot of the bed, holding his cordial. "You understand what this letter is," said Sir John Purefoy quietly to the Duke when the reading was done. "Beyond this room it need never exist. It shows your father had warning, had Ashford's proofs in his hand, and let an innocent man be taken rather than face the scandal. The conviction can be overturned without it. The daybook alone is enough. Say the word, Edward, and your father's memory stays clean." The room waited. Crane, between the footmen, watched with the last live thing in his pale eyes, because this was his final wager, the one he had truly built his fortress on. These families always choose the name. They always choose the name. The Duke looked at the letter in the magistrate's hands for a long moment, and those present said afterward that when he answered, he looked suddenly very like the old Duke, but like the old Duke as he should have been, on a Friday 9 years ago. "An innocent man has spent 9 years in prison for want of the whole truth," he said. "His daughter sat in a cell tonight for the same economy. My father was deceived, and he was also weak, and the first does not excuse the second. It is time somebody in my family said so in the open. Enter the letter in evidence, Sir John, all of it. Justice weighs more than my family's honor." And here, witnesses agreed. His Grace's voice did not tremble, but it came very near. "And it is not Ravenscroft's who have paid the difference these 9 years. They took Mr. Crane away through the sleeping house he had ruled for 30 years, past the silver he had counted and the doors he had locked, and the only thing he said to the Duke, At the threshold, in the flat voice of official grief, was, "Your father would have kept the letter back." "I know," said the Duke of Ravenscroft. "That is why I didn't." The grey light of Friday was just touching the fields when a carriage, not a cart, rolled down the village high street and stopped at the lockup behind the courthouse, and a constable, embarrassed for the second time in 2 days, hurried out with his keys. Emma, on her bench, heard the iron door unlocked and stood, clutching her mother's Bible, braced for magistrates. But the man who stooped through the low stone doorway, hatless, hollow-eyed, was the Duke of Ravenscroft. He stopped just inside, as if the last step were the one he had no right to take, and Emma saw, she who read faces the way she read figures, that the shuttered gray mask was gone, burned off, and what was underneath had not slept and had not forgiven itself. "It's done," he said. "Crane is taken. The books, the page, everything, your father's page, Emma. It's found. He is coming home." And then, before she could speak or breathe or believe any of it, the Duke of Ravenscroft did what no one in that village had ever seen a duke do. He bowed his head to a servant girl in a stone cell. "I let them call you a thief in my own hall," he said. "I turned my back on you before 40 people. It was the only way to make him feel safe, and I would do it again to free your father, and I will spend a very long time asking your pardon for it all the same. There was one moment on the staircase when you looked at me," his voice failed and steadied. "I have faced most things, Emma Ashford. That was the hardest." Emma stood in the cold little room in the gray dawn light, with 9 years ending around her, and found that her legs would not quite hold, and that it did not matter, because he had crossed the last step after all. "You knew my name," she managed, against his shoulder. "I've known it for weeks," said the Duke. "I was waiting for you to give it to me. You did say, as I recall, there's a difference." The Marshalsea prison in London opened its gates to visitors at 9 o'clock. At 9 o'clock on a bright, windy morning in May, a carriage with the Ravenscroft Arms on its door stood waiting in the shabby street outside, and had been waiting, in fact, since 8, because its 2 passengers had left the inn far too early, and neither would admit why. Emma sat with her father's freedom in her lap. That was what it amounted to, a leather folder of documents she had read so many times in the past 3 weeks that she could recite them. The order of release, the record of Crane's committal for trial, the sworn statements, and on top, heaviest of all for its few lines, the King's pardon for Thomas Ashford, his conviction overturned, the said Thomas Ashford being wholly innocent of the charges. Wholly innocent. 400 years of law, and it had taken those 2 words 9 years to travel from the truth to the paper. There had been more, and Emma had fought it. The Duke had settled every farthing of her father's debts, the debts that had kept him in the Marshalsea long after any sentence, the pitiless arithmetic of debtor's prison where a man pays for his own cell and sinks deeper by owing for it. He had done it quietly, through the solicitor, and when Emma discovered it and stood in his study with her chin up, insisting it be counted a loan, the Duke had listened gravely and replied that 11,000 stolen pounds were being recovered from a bank in Leeds, that the money had been bled from the estate on Crane's watch, while her father sat wrongly imprisoned for the bleeding, and that if she wished to argue about who owed what to whom, he would happily instruct counsel, but she should know the Ashford side would lose. It was the closest they had come to a quarrel. She had laughed in the middle of it, which ruined her position entirely. Now she sat turning the folder in her hands while the wind bowled down the grimy street, and the Duke watched her from the opposite seat and said, at last, gently, "You're afraid." 9 years. Emma looked at the high blank wall with its little door. "I was a child when the gates closed, and I've only ever seen him in the visiting room since an hour at a time, with a warder by the wall. He's 59 and prisons make men older. What if—" she stopped and started again lower. "In his letters he's still Papa, peppermints and sums, but letters can be brave. What if I've been writing to a man who doesn't quite exist anymore and the gate opens and a stranger comes out?" "Then we shall take the stranger home," said the Duke, "and feed him and put him in the sun and be patient, and I think you will find your father inside him within a fortnight. Innocence keeps a man, Emma. Guilt is what rots them." He paused. "Also, I have it on excellent authority that he was told only of his release, not who obtained it and not who is waiting. You wanted to see his face. You're about to." The little door in the great gate opened at 9:04. The man who stepped through it, blinking in the windy sunlight, carrying a small bundle and a Bible, was thin and gray, and stooped a little at the shoulders. And Emma, who had planned a composed and gentle approach so as not to overwhelm him, was out of the carriage before the footman touched the door, running across the cobbles of a public street with her bonnet blowing back. 14 years old again, 9 years and all her patience gone in a single heartbeat. "Papa." Thomas Ashford turned, and whatever prison had taken from him, it had not touched the thing that mattered, because the stooped shoulders came up, and the gray face broke open like morning, and he dropped his bundle on the cobbles of Borough High Street and caught his daughter as if she were still small enough to catch. "Emmy," he said into her hair. "Emmy, Emmy." Just the name over and over, the great accountant, the man of beautiful columns, reduced to a single word and rich beyond counting. It was some time before either of them could manage anything else. The wind flapped at them. A costermonger's cart rattled past. London went about its business around two people standing perfectly still at the center of the world. When at last her father held her back at arm's length to look at her, and looked instead at his own hands holding her, as if they had done something impossible, his eyes found the folder she had pressed into them. "They read me the order," he said. "Released, pardoned, innocent, wholly innocent asterisk. They read it twice. I asked them to." His voice was a cracked whisper of the one that used to fill their parlor. 9 years, Emmy, I have prayed to know how God would do it, and I could never see the way. Who found the page? The chaplain would tell me nothing. Who did this?" "Your daughter did it," said a voice behind them. Thomas Ashford looked up at the tall young man who had approached, hat in hand, from the carriage, looked, and narrowed his eyes, and went very still, in the way of a man seeing a resemblance across 30 years. "You'll be his son," he said slowly. "You have your mother's look about the eyes. I heard her sing once in your corridor. I don't suppose you know it, your grace, but I know it," said the Duke of Ravenscroft. "I know the song, Mr. Ashford, and I know who carried it out of my house, and I know who brought it back. She scrubbed my pots under a false name to reach my archives. She picked a lock my solicitor petitions to pass. She found the shaved figures that 3 audits missed. She sat in a cell one night for it without breaking, and this morning she has ruined a very good bonnet running across Borough High Street." He said it lightly, but his eyes were not light at all. "The law will tell you a magistrate freed you, sir. Don't believe the law. It was Emma, first and last. I only had the honor of holding the lamp." Thomas Ashford looked from the Duke to his daughter, who had written asterisk, "Be patient." I am closer than ever for 9 years, while he imagined her safely sewing in a cheap room, and understood, in one long look, everything the letters had never said, and everything the two young people in front of him were not saying now. "Emmy," he said at last unsteadily, "you disobeyed me." "Yes, Papa." "Your mother always said you would." He kissed her forehead, and then he straightened his thin shoulders and did a thing that made the footman look away and blink. He offered the Duke of Ravenscroft his hand, not as a servant, not as a ruined man, but as one gentleman to another, the way he had raised his hat to washerwomen and countesses alike his whole honest life. "Your father wronged me, your grace, and your father was deceived as I was. I'll carry no grudge against the dead. But I'm told the chaplain hears everything, that when you were offered the chance to keep his weakness dark, you put it into evidence with your own hand." His grip tightened. "I kept books 30 years. I know what that entry cost." "Less than yours cost you," said the Duke. "It's a debt the Ravenscrofts won't clear in my lifetime, but I've a proposal toward the interest if you'll hear it over breakfast. You'll find, sir, That freedom smells considerably of coffee. They took him home, not to lodgings, but to Ravenscroft Hall, to rooms in the south front where the sun came all day, and the Duke's proposal toward the interest turned out to be this. The estate wanted a steward it could trust. The books wanted rebuilding from 9 poison years, and there was one man in England who knew those ledgers to the last farthing and had proved he would go to prison rather than falsify a line. Thomas Ashford wept over the offer, accepted it within the week, and was discovered by the housemaids, before the month was out, teaching the kitchen maid's little brother to do sums for sport, with peppermints for prizes. The county, which had dined on the scandal of Crane's arrest for a season, performed its inevitable somersault. The same drawing rooms that had whispered *Ashford like a curse for 9 years now retold the whole tale breathlessly. The false maid, the midnight ledgers, the brooch, the flagstone, and it improved with every telling. Emma bore the sudden fame as she had borne everything else, with a straight back and a private eyebrow, and was heard to say only that she preferred the version where she had picked the lock with a single hat pin, since it saved her mother's second one from the mud of exaggeration. And on a golden evening at the end of June, the Duke of Ravenscroft asked Miss Emma Ashford to walk with him in the rose garden. The household observing this departure from every window that could decently manage it, and stopped by the sundial, and turned to her, and got no further than her name before he had to stop and begin again. "I faced Crane across a dark room," he said, with more composure than this. "Emma, I had a speech. I've had it for weeks. I wrote it the night you sat in that cell, and I walked the gallery till dawn hating myself. It was a very good speech. It had everything in order like your columns." He took a breath. "It's gone, so you shall have the plain figures instead, and you may audit them. I love you. I think I have loved you since the night you stood in the archive dust and refused to give me your own father's name because you'd promised yourself you'd earn the telling. I am asking you to marry me, and before you answer, there's an entry I must put in evidence against myself, because I won't build this on a hidden page." He held her eyes, the way she had once made herself hold his. "I lied to you once. On the staircase before all of them, when you looked up at me, I turned away and let you go to that cell believing it. I'd argue it was necessary. It was still a lie and you paid for it, and I've not slept properly since. So the promise is this, and it's the whole of my fortune, never again. Not to spare you, not to save you, not for any strategy on earth. Whatever comes, you will have the truth from me first and everything else after. That's the contract, Emma. Audit it." Emma looked at him for a long moment in the low gold light. This man who had put his own father's shame into the record for hers, who carried tea trays like a burglar, who confessed his one lie in the middle of his own proposal, because he could not bear a shaved figure even in his happiness. "The accounts balance, your grace," she said, not quite steadily. "Yes." He laughed. Those at the windows swore to it. The Duke who never laughed and produced the ring. And it was not the Ravenscroft diamond, which he had judged correctly, that she would find visible. It was a small, fine, old-fashioned band of rubies that had belonged to his mother, the Lady of the Lullaby, and it fitted as if someone had measured her finger while she slept, which Mrs. Finch later admitted, using a loop of thread and enormous stealth someone had. They were married in September in the village church, with the whole household in the pews and Thomas Ashford, upright as a column of figures, giving away the bride. And it was noticed, the county noticed everything that year, that when the register was signed, the new Duchess of Ravenscroft wrote her name in a hand so beautiful, so neat, so exactly like fine print, that the old vicar looked at it twice. "You've a remarkable hand, your grace," he said. "Thank you," said Emma. "It's my father's." 2 years later, on a warm evening in June in the year 1828, the windows of Ravenscroft Hall stood open to the rose garden, and the house, the county still remarked upon it, was full of noise. Music first. The Duchess of Ravenscroft sat at the piano in the long drawing room, playing something light and quick, while on the carpet beside her a very small person with the Ravenscroft eyes and the Ashford chin, the Lady Charlotte, aged 11 months, tyrant of 40 rooms, conducted the performance with a wooden spoon. On the sofa, upright as a column of figures even in his shirt sleeves, sat the steward of the estate, pretending to read the corn prices and actually watching his granddaughter with an expression that would have astonished 9 years of prison warders. "She has your ear, Emmy," said Thomas Ashford. "She came in on the beat that time with the spoon." "She has your patience," said Emma. "She's been rehearsing the same passage for an hour." "That," said her father comfortably, "she has from her mother." By the window, the Duke of Ravenscroft was frowning over a letter, but it was a frown with no weather in it, and Emma finished her phrase and said, without turning, "The Leeds Bank again." "The last of it. Sir John writes the final sum was paid over Tuesday." He came and set the letter on the piano. £11,000 and 9 years' interest, clawed back shilling by shilling from a false name in a Leeds ledger. The northern tenants' portion had been quietly returned to them 2 years since, and the village school that the remainder built had opened at Lady Day, with a brass plate by the door that said only in memory of an honest man's 9 years. The county assumed it referred to some Ravenscroft. The family let them. Of Mr. Crane, the letter said little, and the household said less. He had been convicted on his own beautiful daybook. Juries, it turned out, could admire craftsmanship and despise the craftsman in the same quarter hour, and transported for life. From the ship before it sailed, he had sent the Duke a single line. "Your Grace still holds one entry unrecorded." No one had ever discovered what it meant. Crane, patient to the last, had presumably intended no one should. Later, the baby asleep, the steward gone up with his candle, the house settling into its warm summer dark. The Duke and Duchess of Ravenscroft walked the rose garden alone, along the path to the sundial, as they did most fine evenings. And it was there, with her arm through his, that Emma said, in the tone of a woman finally opening an account left too long unexamined, "Edward Crane's entry, the unrecorded one, I know what it is." "Do you?" said the Duke carefully. "I've known for 2 years, and I've been waiting for you to enter it yourself, and you are the stubbornest man in England." She stopped by the sundial and faced him. "The night of the broken glass, you saw my hands and the ink, and by your own account you spent weeks testing me. Latin books, French, watching, 2 hunters, you said, stalking the same beast." Her chin came up, exactly as it had in a lamplit archive, and he felt the old match strike in his chest. "Only it won't balance, Edward. I've run those figures 100 times. A suspicious man doesn't move a suspected spy closer * to his archives. A suspicious man doesn't send his household's only key cutter to a locksmith. And a man who needed a lullaby to guess whose daughter I was, she took his hands, would not have written in the 2nd week of my employment to the chaplain of the Marshalsea prison. Papa told me. Last Christmas, over the port. A letter came, he said, 2 years before my release, asking most particularly after the welfare and whereabouts of the daughter of Thomas Ashford, and signed only a friend to the family. The chaplain, bless him, answered that she was believed to be in service in the north and safe. Her voice softened. The 2nd week Edward, before the fever, before the song. You knew me almost from the first. So the entry I want recorded, under your own rule of the whole truth first, is this: when and how. The Duke of Ravenscroft looked down at his wife's hands in his, ringed now, and still ink-stained, because Duchess or no Duchess, she kept the estate's private accounts herself, in a hand like fine print, and began, slowly, to smile. "You'll want the source document," he said. "Very well. It's 12 years old. It's a summer morning, and a young man of 23 is sitting on the mounting block in his father's courtyard in the blackest temper of his life. He'd quarreled with the old Duke about his future, the way sons do, and been told he was ornamental and idle and would come to nothing, the way fathers do. And while he is sitting there despising the world, he becomes aware that he is being watched by a person of 9 or 10, in a blue dress, who has been waiting by the accountant's gig and chalking sums on my flagstones. Long division, said the Duke, for asterisk pleasure asterisk. I'd never seen anything like it. She had chalked to the knuckles. I remember her hands perfectly, small and quick and white to the wrist, and she looked at me for a while, and then she came over, very businesslike, and offered me half a peppermint. No, breathed Emma. It had been in her pocket, said the Duke, and it had a good deal of pocket about it. I ate it anyway. One doesn't refuse a lady. And she said, I can hear it still, she said. My papa says never mind what anybody says you are. Figures are the only things that never lie, and you can always count what you've actually got. And then the accountant came out and raised his hat to me as if I were worth the trouble and took her up in the gig, and they were gone. He touched the ink stain on her finger gently with his thumb. I never learned her name, but I was 23 and perfectly miserable, and a chalk-dusted infant had just given me the only useful philosophy I ever received in that courtyard, and I never forgot the hands, Emma. That's the whole confession. 12 years later, a scullery maid knelt on my dining room floor, and I saw those same hands, grown with ink where the chalk had been, and something turned over in me that had nothing whatever to do with suspicion. I spent a fortnight telling myself it was suspicion. I wrote to half of York and one prison chaplain to prove it was suspicion, and when the answers came back, and I knew who was scouring my pots and picking my locks, he shrugged, helpless. What was there to do? If I spoke, I'd frighten you into flight, straight into Crane's sight, alone. If I dismissed you, I'd be robbing you of the only road to your father. So I did the one thing left. I moved you nearer the books and cut you a key and put myself where I could stand between you and whatever was coming. The garden was very quiet. Somewhere above, through the open nursery window, came the small sounds of Lady Charlotte dreaming her tyrannies. The whole house, said Emma at last unsteadily, believed you were watching a thief. I know. I believed it. That night in the gallery, the archive, the tests, Edward, I was frightened of you for weeks. I know, said the Duke. It was the only coin I had that Crane would take. He read every face in that house for 30 years, and the one thing I could not afford was for him to read mine. He drew her hand through his arm, and they turned back along the path, toward the lit windows and the sleeping house. So there's your entry, my love, recorded and sworn. The tale the county tells has it wrong way round. They say the Duke noticed a maid's hands were too fine and said nothing and watched and caught his thief. But I knew whose hands they were almost from the start. I said nothing because your battle was yours and you'd have forgiven me anything but taking it from you. And I watched. He stopped at the terrace step, and in the light from the windows she saw 12 years and a peppermint and everything after in his face. I watched over you, Emma, from the very first day. It was never anything else. The Duchess of Ravenscroft, who audited every account that crossed her table and had never yet found a set of books she couldn't fault, looked at this final reckoning for a long moment. The accounts balance, she said, and kissed him, and they went in together to the house where all the doors at last stood open. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.